Hello everyone, welcome back to A Couple Books. This is Couple. Today we are going to be doing another book review. This is going to be on Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero, as I do believe how you pronounce it, Cantero, something along those lines. Once again, apologies. I'm super excited to get into this book. Don't you guys worry, this will be spoiler free. If there will be spoilers, I will be sure to mention it, and there will be a little tag down below. But don't forget, before we get started, to like and subscribe, and I look forward to reading your thoughts and opinions down below. This is a very interesting book. This is a supernatural-esque, horror-esque, adventure-esque fantasy book. It's very interesting. It crosses a lot of genres. In terms of scare factor, there's not a lot, so if you are a scaredy cat and you're not super into the horror genre but you have an interest in it, this is definitely a pick for you. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. Now let's get into more specifics. Now, in terms of the actual story itself, the story is very interesting. We follow 4 characters right here. We have Peter, we have Nate, we have Carrie, and we have Andy, short for Andrea, and we have their dog Tim. Now, these 4 form a sort of Scooby gang about 13 years ago when they spent their summers solving mysteries in this small town. And then their last mystery that they solved involved a river monster, lake monster, and a haunted house where a sorcerer necromancer lived. And this haunted house was rumored to contain a gold mine from this family's legacy. This family's gold was supposedly hidden down below in their basement. Because of the urban legends and the stories around the house and the lake containing monsters, no one ever ventured forth and no one really ever got into it and looked for it. Until 13 years ago, when these kids did their last investigation as the quasi-Scooby gang, when they all went to this island and they basically uncovered that these river monsters were just an urban legend and in fact was a thief who was dressing up as one of these river monsters and going around scaring the locals to keep them away so that he could live inside the mansion to find where this hoard of gold was supposedly being kept. They caught him in typical Scooby antics and they shut him down and they trapped him in a fishing net and sent him over to local authorities to be arrested. Now, 13 years later, he just gets out of prison, and that is pretty much where we open up with our story. He's kind of upset, but he's really happy to just be free man now, and he confessed all of his crimes and he saw what he did was wrong until he runs into Andy, one of the girls of the crew that caught him. And she basically stops him and says, "Why did you go to jail for so long for what you did? You didn't actually steal anything. All you had was honestly mild trespassing." And she's confused why he was put away for so long, and he basically confesses that he could not be in that house any longer and that there was something really dark there and he has no interest in going back. And that's kind of where we start our story. We have Andy, who is a military badass. She was in the military, she's now out of the military, and she's now wanted in 2 states because that's exciting. We have Nate, who is grown up to be in an insane asylum where he is currently hallucinating images of his dead friend, and he's on a lot of medication, and he just is kind of getting and struggling through life at the moment, but honestly has quite an upbeat spirit about everything. We have as well Carrie, who was our kind of like brains of the group, if you want to relate this back to Scooby-Doo. And she went on to go to college to study biology. Of course, she ended up falling out of love with biology and didn't do so well at the end, and then is currently now a bartender. And Peter, their one-time leader, who, of course, you can probably figure out who that is in the Scooby Gang, ended up becoming a movie star and accidentally, or maybe intentionally, OD'd a few years ago and died. And of course, most importantly, we have Tim, who is doing swell and is probably the best character of this book. And, oh, come here. You're on the bed, Mrs. Noby Pants. Yeah, you stayed there. And then we have also Tim the dog, who's probably the best character in this book. Tim is the great-grandson of the original group's dog, and Tim is just amazing. In every way, good dogs are amazing. I love Tim. So these 4 characters, the dog, Nate, Carrie, and Andy, all basically reunite with the understanding that their last case, there was something off about it, and they don't really know what was off about it. But none of them are where they wanted to be. Nate's in an asylum. Carrie's a bartender and not a marine biologist or just a biologist in general. And Andy's wanted in 2 states. And that's not really where any of them saw themselves ending up in life. And they feel like it all connects back to their last case, when they caught the man trying to steal the gold and using the urban legend of these lake monsters to keep the people away. And they just feel like even though they solved it, that they left some stones unturned. And so they deem it necessary to get back together, reunite the gang, minus of course Peter since he's dead, and they're all going to kind of go back and see what actually happened and basically uncover the truth. This book plays homage to a lot of pop culture. I really enjoyed it. It was sold to me as a Scooby-Doo retelling, which in some cases is true, like the four-member gang plus dog solving crimes, that part definitely holds true. However, I saw more in specific payments and nods to that rather than the entirety being like a Scooby-Doo retelling. It really isn't a Scooby-Doo retelling. It is much more a Scooby-Doo love letter. And on top of that, there's also Lovecraftian elements in this. There's Supernatural, the TV show elements in this. There's a lot of different pop culture nods to it. And that is part of the reason I love this book, because seeing each of these nods was so much fun and made this book a wild ride and was really enjoyable because of that. Now, in terms of the actual writing style, so moving past the story into the writing, the author writes very interestingly. It took me a second to get into it. In terms of the actual writing itself, the words used, the prose, his prose was very flowery. He loved his adjectives, and that took a second to get used to, and it was very descriptive. Like, there were moments where I kind of got lost in the description to the point that I got so immersed that, it took me a second to get used to his writing style and really get into the flow of the story. But overall, very good prose, very flowery language. So if that's something you don't like, then something to know. If it's something you do like, also something to know. But yeah, that's his prose. In terms of his formatting of his writing is very interesting. He switches between typical paragraphs and into script language and switches between those. Also, in addition to that, he also has italicized script instructions. And what I mean by that, as coming from someone who is not an expert in script writing nor script reading, so I'm pretty much talking on my tuchus right now. Basically, he has italicized parts where he just basically describes what the scene looks like or what a character is doing in the scene, which was really interesting. Where I was it took me a second, because in one moment you're reading the book like a typical novel, and the next you're reading it like it's a script. And that was a very interesting back and forth he did. It took me a second to get into the flow, but once I was in the flow, it was really actually quite interesting and fun to kind of read like that. What else about this book that I want to tell you guys? In terms of the actual overall story arc, I thought that it was very good. I really enjoyed it. It had he did a really good job of balancing each character, so each character kind of got their own arc. And while some were more undertoned and some were more heavy-handed, overall you felt like each character kind of got their arc, which was enjoyable. Aside from, of course, Peter, since Peter sadly passed. And then Tim got the best arc, because Tim's a good doggy. Tim's the best doggy. Now that's pretty much all I have for spoiler free. The characters are really good. The side characters are not so well done, but they're still decent and still interesting. The actual story itself was quite intriguing and carried a lot of pop culture references that I heavily enjoyed. The writing style was definitely unique and not typical, but after a while I got into it and I really enjoyed it. Overall, because I also thought it stuck the landing of the ending very well, I have to give this a 4 out of 5 stars. My only reason I'm not giving it 5 out of 5 stars is because I did have some issues with how the author wrote certain sequences, and that is mostly because I just felt like I got confused and I would have to reread passages to get what just happened, which is probably a personal issue. So once again, all my opinions are subjective. My opinion doesn't have to be your opinion. So I'm just going to throw that 4 out of 5 stars at it. It wasn't the best book I've read, so it's definitely not a 5-star. It is one of the most interesting books I've read, and it was really fun, and I really enjoyed it. It's probably been one of the most enjoyable reads I've had in a long time, so there's that to it. In terms of who should be picking this up, I do think that if you are a horror fan, it is still a really fun read, and you will get some of its pop culture nods much more. If you love Lovecraft, definitely pick this up. If you are not a horror fan and you don't really know if you like horror, I would pick this up because while it is a horror book technically, it definitely doesn't have a lot of scare factor to it. It is quite much more an adventure book with horror trope nods to it, which is where I found a lot of enjoyment, the pop culture nods. Definitely, if you are looking to get into horror, pick this book up. I would highly recommend you pick it up. I'm looking forward to reading. He's got another book called Supernatural Enhancements, I do believe, that I will pick up because I do want to continue reading this author's works. You know, I really enjoyed it overall. Now, that's pretty much all I have to say about this book, spoiler free. So if you guys wouldn't mind, I just would like to make a few additional comments, but you might consider them spoilers. So we're just going to slap on a spoiler rating, a spoiler warning right here, and we're going to move into that before we close out today. So if you're still here with us, I'm not going to spoil the entire book. I'm not going to spoil the ending or anything major, but there are a few points I would like to jump on that may be spoilerish, so I don't want to say it. I really, in this book, also enjoyed how the character did its, what's the word for it? Foreshadowing. He was his foreshadowing was quite interesting, and also how he tied up all of his loose ends. As we know, in the first chapter, there's a moment where our former convict, who just got released from jail from the last case that this group solved together, mutters in tongues. And I was really confused about that. I was like, it's definitely going to connect back to the story. And like literally up until the very end of the story, I was like, I don't see how this is connecting. It's just a loose end. And he still brought it in for the finish line. So one other thing I really enjoyed about this book, that it might be a spoiler, is that he does a really good job with finding the tiny moments throughout the book and tying them back together. Every single moment, anything from some sentences that seem out of place, some of the character development that they would place on a character that you were like, this is irrelevant, would later come back, and it was super surprising. Nothing here was left unturned, and I really appreciated having an entire story come together. I got confused and I was like, oh, he left this entire subplot unfinished. I went back and reread the passage just to make sure. He didn't. This Edgar did a very good job with tying up all the loose ends, which is something that's hard to find sometimes. You know, sometimes authors like to leave loose ends, and he didn't leave any to my knowledge, and I really enjoyed that about this book immensely. But I think that's all I have for you guys today. So spoiler warning gone. And I thank you all for coming here today and looking up my review about Meddling Kids. I look forward to your guys' thoughts and opinions down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys later. Bye.